Welcome to Night Echoes. If you like horror stories, don't hesitate to hit the like button and subscribe. To most of my friends, landing a job in the basement of the county records archive sounded like a punishment, or at best a bad horror movie setup. But for me, at the time, it was a genuine blessing. I was 22, halfway through college, and I really needed the money. The night shift, 11 at night to 6 in the morning, offered me something no other part-time job could. Absolute silence to study in. The place was exactly what you'd picture. Row after row of cold gray metal shelving, packed with identical cardboard boxes and leather-bound volumes worn thin with age. Everything down there smelled like dust, damp, and old paper. Like stalled time. The only light we had came from those long, typical fluorescent tubes that hum quietly and sometimes flicker for no reason. It was a basement of thick, heavy concrete, where not a single bar of cell signal ever made it in. The first few weeks were rough, sure, but not because of fear. They were hard because of the boredom and the cold that settled in during the early morning hours. I've always been a very pragmatic person. If I suddenly heard a dull thud at the far end of one of the aisles, my mind immediately jumped to the old building's pipes settling under pressure, not to spirits. If a door slammed shut somewhere in the distance, I'd curse the draft sneaking in through the ventilation ducts. To me, everything had a boring, technical explanation. My routine became rock solid. I'd get to my main desk, right at the entrance of the archive. I'd switch on a small battery radio, not to listen to music, just to have a human voice cutting through the heavy silence. Pour myself a thermos of pitch-black coffee, and open my books. I was cut off from the outside world, completely alone, surrounded by thousands upon thousands of other people's lives filed away on paper. It was a perfectly normal, monotonous, controlled existence. Until the third week. That Tuesday of the third week, I showed up a little more tired than usual. Setting my backpack down on the desk, I noticed something out of place right away. Right in the center of my workspace, lit by the pale glow of the desk lamp, sat a file. It wasn't one of the new cardboard folders we used for recent paperwork. It was an old, thick file, tied shut with a cotton cord that had already gone yellow with age. I sighed heavily. I thought exactly what any employee in my position would think. The day shift, who were always rushing around and disorganized, had pulled some old work, left it lying there, and expected me, the new kid on the graveyard shift, to file it away for them and clean up their mess. I checked the label on the side, walked over to the corresponding section in aisle G, slotted it back into place on the shelf, and forgot about it for the rest of the night. But the next day, when I clocked in for my shift at 11 sharp, the same file was back in the center of my desk. This time, it wasn't closed. It was open, right to the middle. I walked over, honestly more annoyed than scared. I glanced at the document. The ink was a sepia color, written in one of those cursive, elegant, tightly packed handwriting styles nobody uses anymore. Dated to the mid-1970s. I flipped quickly through the pages, trying to figure out if this was some urgent process or what exactly they wanted me to do with it. I didn't feel any chills, didn't see shadows, didn't hear any ghostly noises. I just felt that ordinary, mundane irritation you get when you think your coworkers are playing a heavy-handed prank on you or just dumping their work on you. Determined not to be made a fool of, I snapped the file shut. I grabbed one of my yellow sticky notes, took my pen, and wrote in big, clear letters, "Please stop messing with my desk. I already filed this yesterday." I stuck the note right in the center of the leather cover of the file. I walked back to aisle G with heavy footsteps, wedged the folder tightly between the other boxes so it would be a pain to pull out, and went back to my coffee and my books, fully convinced that my little message had solved the problem. Thursday night, I showed up with my mind blank, thinking only about the calculus exam I had on Friday. I opened the metal basement door, flipped on the lights, and headed down the stairs, rubbing my hands together. When I looked up toward my desk, I froze. There it was. Again. The same old leather-bound file. My first instinct wasn't fear. It was a hot fury climbing up my neck. I was convinced some idiot from the evening shift had stayed hidden somewhere to pull an elaborate prank on me. I strode toward the desk, ready to grab the file and throw it in the trash. But once I got close enough, the anger vanished instantly. It felt like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water down my back. The file was open to the exact same page as the night before. And there, stuck right in the center of the old page, was my yellow sticky note. But it wasn't the way I'd left it. Underneath my handwriting, underneath the furious blue strokes where I'd asked them to stop messing with my desk, there was an answer. It was written directly on top of my post-it, but the ink was that same sepia tone from the 1970s, and the handwriting was identical to the documents. Cursive, a little shaky, but unmistakably old. It said only 3 words. Signature is missing. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it thudding in my ears. I leaned in close to the note, barely breathing. The sepia ink had a wet sheen to it. It was fresh. I stumbled back a couple of steps, tripping over my own chair. My mind, clinging stubbornly to its skepticism, tried to force some kind of explanation. Someone was doing this to me. Someone with an old fountain pen was hiding in the shadows, waiting to see my reaction. I grabbed a heavy metal flashlight we kept in a drawer and started walking toward the aisles. "Is anybody there?" I shouted. My voice came out pathetic, thin, swallowed instantly by all the paper and cardboard boxes. I made my way into aisle G. The cold there was different. It wasn't that natural, stagnant damp of the basement anymore. It was a sharp cold, one that cut straight to the bone. So much so that my breath started forming little white clouds in front of the flashlight beam. The electric hum of the fluorescent lights turned sharper, almost unbearable, pressing against my eardrums. I walked slowly between the shelves, checking every dark corner, under the tables, behind the file cabinets. There was no one there, and yet the heaviness in the air was suffocating, as if the air pressure itself had changed. I had the absolute, terrifying certainty that the aisle was occupied by someone I simply couldn't see. I didn't run. I know it sounds stupid. In the movies, people scream and bolt at the first sign of trouble. But in real life, fear sometimes paralyzes you, and your brain starts inventing excuses so you don't lose control. I desperately needed that paycheck. I couldn't risk getting fired for abandoning a locked building at 2 a.m. just because a piece of paper spooked me. I hurried back to my desk, dropped into my chair, and didn't dare touch the file. I sat there staring at it, wrapped up in my jacket, hands shaking around my thermos of coffee. All I could hear was the ticking of the wall clock and my own breathing. My eyes locked on the entrance to aisle G, feeling like at any moment something was going to step out of that darkness to finish the paperwork. I stayed in that chair for what felt like hours. The coffee went completely cold, and my calculus book stayed open to the same page, forgotten. I couldn't take my eyes off the file, waiting for the page to turn on its own. for the empty chair across from me to move. But nothing happened, just the thick, heavy silence of the basement. Finally, common sense, or maybe just sheer desperation not to lose my mind, took over. I figured if something had wanted to hurt me, it would have already done it while I was standing alone in the dark of that aisle. If I was going to run out and lose the only job that let me pay for school, I at least needed to know what in the hell was going on. I took a deep breath, reached out my trembling hands and pulled the file toward me under the lamplight. I started reading. It was an official adoption decree, dated November 1974. The document detailed the legal transfer of a young girl to her new parents. The handwriting was flawless, the same cursive that had written, "Signature is missing" on my note. I read through every line, names, dates, official stamps. But by the time I reached the bottom of the page, the clerk's perfect penmanship broke down. Where the name and signature of the officiating clerk should have gone, the pen stroke simply shattered. Instead of letters, there was a long, erratic line of sepia ink dragging downward across the page, as if the hand holding the pen had suddenly gone heavy and dropped, dragging the tip across the paper. At the bottom of the page, a red bureaucratic stamp, applied much later, read in block capital letters, "Process incomplete. File away." Suddenly, it clicked. This wasn't a prank. I was looking at the last few seconds of a man's life. A records clerk who, 50 years earlier, had suffered a massive heart attack right at this very desk, leaving a family in legal limbo, never getting to sign the most important document of their lives. A bureaucrat condemned to relive the anxiety of a job left unfinished. Right at that moment of clarity, the atmosphere shifted, hard. The static on my little radio cut off all at once, dropping me into absolute silence. The temperature dropped so fast I felt the cold ache in my gums. The long fluorescent tube overhead started flickering wildly until, with a dry click, it went out completely, leaving me with nothing but the small yellow circle of light from my desk lamp. And then, I felt it. It wasn't a sound. It was air pressure. The unmistakable physical weight of someone having just stepped in directly behind me. I felt a concentrated, freezing cold brush against the back of my jacket collar. A dark shadow fell across the file, blocking part of the light. Whoever, whatever it was leaning in over my right shoulder, staring intently at the page. Every animal survival instinct in me screamed to jump up, sprint for the stairs, and never look back. My muscles were coiled tight, ready to bolt. But I didn't. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes locked on that broken line of ink. I thought about what it must feel like to carry the stress of unfinished paperwork, the anxiety of never getting to close out a case. Whatever presence stood behind me wasn't trying to scare me. It had spent weeks asking me in its own clumsy, limited way to help it finish its job. With my right hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the plastic, I picked up my blue pen. I could feel the cold just inches from my cheek, like someone was holding their breath, waiting for my next move. I pressed the tip of my pen to the yellowed paper, right over the broken line. I faked a quick, confident signature, and immediately after drew a large diagonal line across the institutional box and wrote, in big, clear block letters, "Process complete and approved." The moment I lifted the pen off the page and set the final period, everything stopped. That suffocating pressure crushing my shoulders and pinning me to my chair vanished instantly, like someone had suddenly opened a release valve. The sharp cold that had been freezing the back of my neck faded away within seconds, replaced almost immediately by the basement's usual warm, damp temperature. And then I heard it, very close to my left ear. It wasn't a voice or a growl or some ghostly wail like they describe in the movies. It was a sigh, a long, deep, tired sigh. The exact sound anyone makes when they finally set down an unbearable weight they've been carrying for years. In front of me, the heavy leather cover of the file shifted, pushed by a soft breeze that had no business existing in that sealed basement. The folder closed on its own, slowly, until it landed with a final, dull thud against the wood of my desk. Almost at the same moment, the fluorescent light overhead flickered a couple of times and came back on fully. The electric hum returned, and the static on my little battery radio started up again, filling the space with its familiar white noise. I sat there, alone, staring at the closed folder. I ran my hands over my face, rubbed my eyes, and breathed normally for the first time in what felt like hours. I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't afraid anymore. There was an immense, strange peace sitting in my chest. I got up quietly, took the file, walked with a steady step over to aisle G, and slotted it back into its exact place inside its archive box. It never showed up on my desk again. I didn't quit that night. In fact, I kept working at that archive for over a year, until I finished my coursework, graduated, and landed a job in my field. Through all those months heading down to that basement in the dead of night, I never heard another strange noise, never felt that biting cold again, never found another yellow note written in sepia ink. The place went back to being exactly what it looked like, a boring old basement full of boxes. These days, I'll sometimes drive past the old county records building, and it's impossible not to think about that man. That experience changed me for good, because it made me realize we've gotten a lot of things wrong about fear. We grow up believing ghosts are monsters hiding in the dark to hurt us or drive us insane. But that night, I learned that, more often than not, a ghost is nothing more than a person trapped inside their own anxiety. Someone stuck in time, frustrated by something they never got to finish, just waiting in the dark for someone else, even a stranger with a blue pen, to stop for 1 second, listen, and help them close the book so they can finally go rest. Thanks for listening. If you have a story you'd like us to tell, don't hesitate to send it in. The information is in the description. See you soon.